Even now, as the sun dips behind the old riverbanks and the cicadas hum their evening song, I can't shake that night, first time I crossed that line, and it gnaws at me more each year. I'm a 65-year-old man, seated on this creaking porch swing outside a weathered cotton warehouse that once smelled of sweat and cotton lint, the same warehouses where I learned what desperation could do to a man's soul. That memory comes wrapped in the scent of damp wood and stale bourbon, and I can still taste that bourbon tonight, even though the glass sits empty at my side. That unexpected hush of the river, the crackle of lightning bugs, it all brings me back to '78, when a drifter named Tom wandered into town bragging about cheating that old folks' home, and I told myself I was doing the right thing, protecting folks too frail to speak up. And yet, I shook so bad my hand nearly dropped the .38 pistol when the world went black for him. If you're feeling the weight of these words, I'd be grateful if you'd give me a thumbs up, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and subscribe so you'll stick around for the rest of this confession, because I'm about to tell you why that first night stole my peace and led me down a path I never dreamed I'd tread. I've kept this to myself for decades, locking it away behind polite smiles at family gatherings and silent prayers at sunrise. But each creak of these old porch boards snaps me back, reminding me there's no running from what we've done when we call it justice. Tonight, I sweat under the faint glow of an oil lamp, wondering if the faces I once freed from fear are now haunting me. There's a photograph in my study, a sepia snapshot of me in marine blues, younger and full of purpose. I'd fought overseas believing in a noble cause, but I never learned how to wrestle with the cost of taking a life when law and order slip your grasp. That conflict, that burning question of who gets to be judge or jury, it's what keeps me tossing and turning under this moonlit sky. So sit back with me for these next few minutes, lean in as I peel back the layers of a man who wore kindness like a coat but hid a darkness beneath that collar. I'll show you how a small town's secrets can shape a man's fate and how regret lingers longer than any jail sentence. And by the time we finish, I promise you'll be looking at justice and mercy with new eyes, wondering if the lines we draw on morality can ever hold the truths we bury inside. This story has lived in my heart longer than I dared admit, and tonight, by the ticking of my grandfather's pocket watch, I'm ready to set it free. You see, this isn't just a bedtime tale or a ghost story to share around a fire. It's the echo of a decision that broke my heart and infected my dreams. The cotton warehouses stand silent now, but back then their boards groaned under the weight of whispers and rumors. Each time the river lapped at its banks, I heard my own heartbeat pound in rhythm, as if the currents themselves demanded an answer. When I close my eyes, I can still hear the creak of that flagstone floor in my parlor, feel the cold metal of the pistol pressed between my fingers as I took the only life I ever claimed. And though I walked away under the pale Georgia moon, I never truly left that moment behind. So here's my question. If you held that pistol, how would you justify pulling the trigger? I remember those long, sun-drenched afternoons of my childhood like they were painted in soft watercolors, back before the cotton warehouses wore their rusted patina and the riverbanks bore the scars of time. I was just a lanky boy of 10 or 11, barefoot on the dusty dirt roads that wound between weathered clapboard cottages and tall stalks of wild grass. My mom would call me in for supper when the cicadas' song grew too loud, and I'd wipe calloused hands on my overalls before stepping onto the creaking wooden porch, where the scent of cornbread baking in the oven mingled with honeysuckle drifting in through the screen door. There was a steady rhythm to our days, dawn's soft glow waking me to the low hum of crickets, the rooster's crow before first light, then off to the river with Pop's old rowboat as he taught me to fish. I'd sit there in silence, heart pounding like the paddles on the hull, convinced that kindness was the currency that kept the town alive, and that folks always returned at kindness in spades. My dreams were simple then, to grow up strong like my dad, to walk tall in the blue of a handsome uniform like my granddad before me, and to marry a girl who'd laugh easy and love a bar and dance. I believed, without question, that the world was honest and good, and that any man who did right by his neighbors would be looked after in return. Sundays meant church bells and white dresses fluttering like butterflies, hymns echoing through stained glass while the congregation's voices rose in unison. Afterwards, we'd gather under the old magnolia tree for picnic plates piled high with fried chicken, collard greens, and sweet iced tea, laughter drifting through the air like fireflies at dusk. Everyone knew everyone, and gossip spread faster than lightning bugs on a warm summer night. But still, my little heart felt safe in that quilt of familiar faces, until the day I first saw desperation lurking behind a pair of hollow eyes. It happened when I was about 14. A drifter came to town, ragged coat hanging off his shoulders, telling tall tales of bilking the old folks' home out by the cotton docks. He wore arrogance like a badge, sneering when the neighbors offered him a biscuit and a cup of coffee. I remember watching his silhouette at the edge of Mom's kitchen window, how the lamplight cast long shadows that seemed to twist and slither across the floorboards. That night, the gentle breeze carried a chill I couldn't shake, and I thought, for the first time, that maybe not everyone played by the rules I'd held sacred. Sigh, I was still that hopeful boy, bright-eyed, believing love and decency were the truest forms of courage, but the tiny seed of something darker took root in me then. I promised myself I'd protect those too weak to protect themselves, just like Pop had always protected Ma and me. Little did I know how far I'd carry that promise when the stakes grew heavier. But in those days, before the river's hush turned ominous and before the warehouse walls echoed with silent screams, life felt as steady and predictable as the hands on my grandfather's pocket watch ticking through prayer times and harvest seasons. I would chase fireflies with my sister in the tall grass, feeling the soft tickle of summer on my skin, unaware that one day I'd be chasing shadows in my own soul, and that the simple faith I clung to so tightly would bend under the weight of choices I couldn't yet imagine making. That boy believed in the goodness of people, and I'd give anything to bring him back for just one more afternoon by the water's edge, where all that mattered was the tug of a fish on the line and the promise of tomorrow's sunrise. That afternoon I was helping my father mend a fence by the back pasture when I first laid eyes on her, Sarah Jenkins, the neighbor's daughter, eyes shining like the river at dawn. And I couldn't explain why my heart started pounding harder than Pop's old diesel tractor. I remember my mother calling us in for supper, and I lingered by the porch, wiping sweat from my brow, just to catch another glimpse of her in her Sunday best, the lace on her collar trembling in the breeze. I was 16 then, lanky as a beanpole, my older brother off at college, and my teacher, Mr. Carter, still praising my essays about heroes and honor. But in that moment, none of that mattered. A stray letter fluttered to my feet, dust motes dancing in the golden light as I stooped to pick it up, an invitation to the county fair, written in Sarah's flowing script, asking me to meet her by the Ferris wheel at dusk. My palms went slick, and I pressed the envelope to my chest, the scent of honeysuckle and tin mingling in the air, making my knees go weak. I'd grown up believing that kindness was the highest law, learned from my mother's gentle hands in the kitchen and my father's steady work in the fields. But this felt like something different, something that yanked at my insides with equal parts wonder and fear. Mrs. Jenkins, our kindly old neighbor who'd taught me how to whittle wooden birds, smiled from her rocker on the porch as I passed, and I nodded without trusting my voice to carry a single syllable. When the sun dipped low, I found Sarah waiting, her auburn hair catching the last rays like embers in a dying fire. She handed me 2 cotton candy sticks, one pink, one blue, and laughed when the pink spun into glittering clouds beneath my thumbnail. That laughter, it was the kind that wells up from somewhere deep, the kind my teacher always said could light up a room. In that instant, I felt a new line drawn in the air between who I'd been, a dutiful son, a good neighbor's boy, and who I might become, a man capable of fierce devotion, ready to defy the rules to protect what he loved. As the Ferris wheel creaked into motion behind us, I felt an unfamiliar thrill, a sense that life was fuller, richer, and far more fragile than I'd ever known. We talked of everything and nothing: school dances, summer storms, her dreams of becoming a nurse so she could tend to the sick and weary. I admired her gentle strength, the way she spoke of caring for others, and I realized then that courage lived in quiet acts of mercy more than in any battlefield. Yet, shadows lurked at the edges of my mind, stories I'd heard about drifters who preyed on the old folks' home, whispers of corruption in the sheriff's office, stories that made me yearn to shield Sarah and my family from harm. The memory of that day stayed with me like a heartbeat in my chest, a constant reminder that love can be as sharp as any blade, cutting through our convictions and demanding we choose, stand by the law, or become the law yourself. When I walked her home under a canopy of stars, I could feel the weight of that decision settle around my shoulders like a heavy coat. Sarah lingered at her gate, slipping the letter back into my hand and pressing her fingers against mine in a silent promise. My breath caught, and for a heartbeat, I believed I could protect her from anything: floods on the river, storms at sea, even the darker storms brewing in men's hearts. That night, I lay awake on the thin mattress of my boyhood bed, the crickets singing through the open window, clutching Sarah's letter as if it were a talisman. I realized I'd never been the same since. The trigger had been pulled, not by a gun, but by a simple spark of connection, an unexpected gift that opened me to possibilities and dangers I'd never imagined. And though I didn't know it then, that moment would guide every choice I'd make in the years to follow, leading me down a path where love and justice blurred into one another, and where saving those I cared for demanded a price more terrible than I could bear. Life after that first night wasn't the calm I'd imagined. Instead of relief, I found myself pacing these very porch boards at dawn, staring at the river as if it held answers I couldn't hear. Neighbors whispered about Tom's disappearance. Some said he'd skipped town. Others blamed the sheriff's office for burying the truth. I'd volunteered to help in the search, my stomach twisting each time I saw a patrol car roll past, wondering if they had clues I didn't. At home, Beth asked if I'd had a nightmare. I told her my sleep was restless because of the heat. Behind her gentle eyes, though, I saw worry blooming like kudzu on a fence, and that guilt tasted as bitter as the whiskey I kept pouring at night. My hand shook when I picked up my coffee cup in the mornings, and more than once I caught myself staring at the pocket watch hanging from my vest, its ticking heavy like a judge's gavel announcing my sentence. Pop noticed I was quieter at dinner, that I'd barely touched my fried catfish and greens, and one evening he leaned in close, voice low, asking if something was weighing on me. I nodded, swallowed hard, and told him I was fine. He believed me, God help him, and that line gnawed at my soul. Meanwhile, the deputy who came calling every few days, flashing his badge with a crooked grin, made me dread each knock at the door. I'd smile, invite him in for lemonade, and keep my eyes steady, even though my heart hammered like a freight train. Inside, though, I fought a whirlwind of fear and shame. I wondered if I'd gone too far, if delivering justice had warped me into something unrecognizable. At church that Sunday, I sat in the back pew gripping Sarah's invitation letter, my mind bouncing between images of her laughter at the fair and the cold barrel of the .38 in my palm. I told myself I'd protected my neighbors, that no good man would stand by while drifters preyed on the weak, but I couldn't silence the doubt nibbling at my conscience. Am I protector or predator? The cotton warehouses, once proud sentinels of industry, now loomed like silent judges as I walked past on my way to the feed store. My father's words echoed in my head, "Son, you're made of better stuff than that," and I longed for the innocence of childhood evenings spent chasing fireflies with my sister, when my biggest worry was getting home before curfew. But time marched on, unstoppable, and every tick of that pocket watch reminded me that secrets have a way of surfacing, that guilt grows louder than any neighbor's gossip. I found myself talking in my sleep, mumbling fragments of apologies I'd never voiced in daylight. Once, I dreamt I was on trial, the whole town staring as I stood behind a judge's bench, unable to speak my defense. I woke in a sweat, the dawn light creeping through the curtains, and for a moment I thought my heart might burst from the weight of my own remorse. I knew then that the path I'd chosen, blurring the line between mercy and murder, had put me on shaky ground, and that every step forward dragged me deeper into a darkness I wasn't sure I could escape. And so the dilemma took hold: keep the peace in this sleepy riverside town by burying the past, or stand up in broad daylight and face whatever verdict awaited me, even if it meant losing everything I held dear. I'll never forget the night everything snapped into focus, how the world seemed to slow until the only thing I heard was the tick of my grandfather's pocket watch and the pounding of my own blood in my ears. It was 82, late summer, the air thick with humidity that clung to your skin like a confession you couldn't shake. The land developer, Franklin Caldwell, swaggered onto my porch just after dusk, the brim of his Stetson casting a cold shadow over his eyes. He was the man who'd been trying to drive my wife's family from their homestead, tossing legal threats like stones at our door. I poured us each a measure of bourbon, hands trembling as the ice clinked in our glasses, and tried to find the words that might steer him away, for my wife's sake, for my own. But pride and anger sat heavy in my chest, Anger at the world that let men like him prey on folks with no one to fight their corner. Franklin laughed, thin and sharp as broken glass, leaning back in my cracked rocker. You think you can stop progress with your moral high ground, old man? He spat, voice dragging through the night like a curse. In that moment, I felt a thunderclap of betrayal, not just toward my family, but toward every principle I'd ever held dear. I remember the clock on the mantel seeming to freeze, its second hand pausing mid-tick, the ceiling fan swooshing overhead like a distant storm. My heart was a hammer, every beat demanding I choose. Stand by my convictions, or stand by my blood. I reached for my watch chain, fingers brushing the cool brass, and felt a memory flash, fish rising in the river at dawn, Sarah's laughter under the Ferris wheel, Pop's steady hand on my shoulder when I was just a boy. I realized then that I was holding not just a weapon, but a lifetime of hopes and fears, all weighing down on me like a noose. Franklin rose halfway, leaning across the table, and I saw something flicker in his smile, a sneer that told me he knew he had the power. Rage and fear tangled in my gut, and before I knew it, my hand had slid beneath my jacket to the .38 I'd hidden there. I warned you, I said, voice low, the words raspy as gravel. He scoffed and reached for me, just a movement, but enough to snap something inside me free. The shot rang out like thunder in a chapel, and time unfurled again, each second stretching until I could count every breath. Pause. I heard Franklin's gasp, saw the bourbon spill across the porch boards like a dark stain, and watched his hand fall to the floor with a finality that froze me in place. My first instinct was to drop the gun, to swallow the horror of what I'd done, but the silence that followed was too loud, too accusing. I sank to my knees beside him, hands slick with sweat and blood, and felt a tidal wave of grief crash through me, grief for the life I'd taken, yes, but also grief for the man I'd become. In that instant, I lost more than a neighbor. I lost the fragments of innocence I'd clung to since childhood. The watch in my hand clicked once and then stopped, as if even time refused to move past this moment. I couldn't stand. I couldn't speak. All I could do was cradle that pocket watch, pressing it to my forehead as tears streamed down my face, and weep for the cost of my own brand of justice. Franklin's eyes, wide with shock, stared into mine until the light faded, and his final breath felt like a confession I wasn't ready to hear. That night changed me deeper than any sermon or battlefield ever could. It shattered the line I'd drawn between protector and executioner, and left me with a question that still haunts me. When you decide to become judge and jury, who do you become in the end? The whistle of a distant train cut through my sobs, and I realized there was no turning back. I rose slowly, brushing dust and blood from my knees, and walked inside, leaving Franklin's body on the porch under the moon's pale gaze. In the silence of my study, I placed the stopwatch beside my Marine Corps photo and whispered a prayer for forgiveness I wasn't sure anyone could grant. From that moment on, I carried a hollowness in my chest, an echo of that shot that threatens to burst through my ribs whenever I recall the man I was that night, and the man I left behind. When the door finally closed on that hellish night, I found myself wrapped in a silence so deep it felt like the river's own heartbeat had stopped, leaving me stranded in a sea of my own regrets. In the weeks that followed, I moved through my days like a ghost, each dawn bringing a mechanical routine of rising, dressing, and pretending the world outside still made sense. Neighbors' nods felt hollow, their curious glances like whispered echoes of questions I could never answer. I sat on this very porch swing, gripping my grandfather's pocket watch so tightly the brass edges cut into my palm, each tick a reminder that time was both my confessor and my executioner. Mornings were the worst, when the smell of coffee and cornbread reached my senses without the warmth of conversation or laughter. The river's gentle lapping at the banks sounded like a mocking whisper, as if it knew the darkness I carried and refused to let me forget. My appetite vanished. I'd push food around my plate at supper, the collard greens and fried chicken tasting like ash on my tongue. Even Beth's soft questions, "You doing okay, darling?" pierced me with guilt, for I could only muster a smile and lie that I was just tired. Sarah stopped visiting after Franklin's funeral. She left a note folded in my study, saying she needed space to heal her own wounds, and I understood without fully admitting how that loss cut me deeper than any bullet. Nights were worse still. I'd wake gasping under the weight of nightmares where I stood in a courtroom of ghosts, the gallery filled with hollow-eyed versions of myself and my victims. My prayers in church felt rote, my voice lost in the hymns, as if God's doors had shut tight against my pleas. I tried to find solace in the old Marine Corps uniform stashed in my closet, hoping the memory of purpose and camaraderie might patch the fracture in my soul, but the faded blues only mocked me with their stubborn integrity. The emptiness grew until it felt like a living thing inside my chest, a worm of self-reproach feeding on every memory of kindness I'd once believed defined me. I turned to bourbon again, seeking oblivion in the burn, only to wake parched and hollow, haunted by the metallic sin of fear I'd once unleashed. Even the pocket watch, that symbol of time's mercy and cruelty, ceased to comfort. Its ticking became the sound of every secret I had buried, every moment I'd chosen violence over mercy. The warehouses stood silent now, their broken windows and rusted girders mirroring the wreckage of my spirit. No more children's laughter echoed between their walls, no more cotton bales shifting under the weight of industry, only my own footsteps, heavy with remorse. Time itself seemed to mock me, stretching moments into eternities of regret. I walked the riverbanks at dawn, hoping the mist might wash away my sins, but each drop of dew felt like 1,000 unspoken apologies. The walls of my study closed in on me, lined with sepia photographs of better days, my younger self grinning in uniform, Sarah's bright smile under summer skies, Pop's proud stance on his own porch, each image a testament to a man I was no longer. That boy believed in goodness. Now I doubted even my own heartbeat. I asked myself every morning who had I become, and the only answer I heard was the relentless ticking of that damned watch. In that silence, I wondered if redemption was reserved for saints and sinners, but closed to those who'd played judge and jury with their own hands. My faith in people, in justice, in life itself wavered like a candle fighting a storm. But eventually, as the river carved deeper channels into the earth, I learned that grief and guilt could shape me anew, forging a fragile kind of acceptance. Now I sit here, older and quieter, tracing the worn engravings on my pocket watch and listening to the rustle of leaves where once I heard only judgment. The memory of that night still shadows every moment, but in its darkness I found a strange companion, the knowledge that even in loss, we can seek a path back to ourselves, however narrow and uncertain it may be. One spring morning, I woke before dawn to the stubborn tick of that old pocket watch, its brass face cool against my palm, and something inside me stirred, an echo of a promise I'd made long ago but nearly forgotten in the heavy hush of guilt. I found myself drawn to the little community hall by the river, where they were setting up tables for the weekly meal service to folks down on their luck, and on a whim I offered to help carry dishes, though my hands still shook like autumn leaves in the wind. The chef there, Mary Thompson, looked up at me with surprise and kindness, her eyes saying what neither of us spoke, that even a man with a dark past deserved a chance to do something good. As I scooped beans and corn into styrofoam trays, I could feel a warmth in my chest that hadn't been there since before I crossed that line back in '78, a warmth like sunlight breaking through gray clouds. After the last tray was filled, a young volunteer named Jacob tapped me on the shoulder, offered me a cup of coffee, and thanked me for being there. A simple "thank you, sir" carried the weight of forgiveness I didn't know I needed, and I stood by the steam rising from that cup, hand trembling, as if tasting fresh hope for the first time. Later that afternoon, I found myself at the riverside playground, watching two grandkids swing back and forth, their laughter bright as church bells, and I realized I'd missed these little joys in my life, the unguarded smiles, the simple and perfect moments that don't ask for anything but presence. I reached into my coat pocket, felt the smooth chain of that watch, and for the first time in years, I wound it carefully, listening as it sprang back to life, its ticking steady and sure. That tick felt like a heartbeat I'd nearly forgotten, calling me back to the man I once was and could still become. Not long after, I stopped by the old veterans' home where my Marine buddies lived out their days, and I offered to read letters aloud, to polish boots or mend uniform buttons. The veterans welcomed me with stories of battles fought and comrades lost, their voices rich with memory and their gratitude humbling. As I listened to their laughter and sorrow mixed together, I understood that redemption wasn't a grand gesture, but 1,000 small ones, each kind word, each moment of patience, each decision to show up when I could have turned away. I left that day with a folded letter from a veteran named Joe, who'd written that my presence reminded him of the good that can follow even the darkest nights. And when I tucked that note into my pocket watch case, the metal felt warm, as if sharing in the promise it held. Over the following weeks, I found purpose in these little acts, driving Mrs. Caldwell to her doctor's appointment, planting flowers at the community garden, teaching Sunday school stories to curious children who sat cross-legged at my feet. Each time I said a prayer in that chapel, I felt a thread of connection to something larger than my own regrets, a reminder that life's tapestry is woven from both light and shadow, and that one could not truly exist without the other. In the soft glow of evening, I'd sit on my porch swing and trace the engravings on the pocket watch, listening to its gentle tick-tock and thinking, "You're still here, old friend, and so am I." That rhythm became my new guide, urging me forward step by careful step, teaching me that even broken clocks can measure moments of grace. And though I'll always carry the memory of that fateful night, I now carry something else as well, the knowledge that a man who's fallen can rise again, one deliberate choice at a time, and that every fresh dawn holds a chance to rewrite the story of who we are and who we wish to be. I've sat on this porch swing for hours, the night air cool against my skin, the river's hush like a lullaby coaxing me towards something I've been avoiding for far too long. I reach into my breast pocket and pull out that old brass pocket watch, its face still faintly warm from my touch, and I trace the engraved initials of my grandfather, the man whose steady hand built both this town and the man I thought I'd become. Sigh, tonight, I set it down on the rail, watching the second hand tick by, and I realize I'm ready to let go. I've carried the weight of my past crimes for so many years that I'd forgotten how heavy the burden was until I stood up and tossed the watch into the muddy river below. It plunged with a soft plunk, disappearing beneath the surface in a swirl of moonlit ripples, and I felt something inside me crack open, an ache of finality, but also the first true breath I've drawn in decades. I stand there in the dark, shoulders straightening as if I finally shrugged off a coat that no longer fits. The river carries my secret into the depths, and in that moment, I forgive myself. No, I release myself from the guilt that's haunted me since '78. I whisper into the night, I choose to live on. My voice is small, trembling, but it carries across the water like a promise. I'm not pretending the past never happened. I'm honoring it by refusing to let it define my every step. Tomorrow, I'll take down the photographs in my study, the ones with sepia smiles and faded uniforms, and pack them away in a box meant for keepsakes rather than ghosts. I'll paint this porch rail fresh white, cover the scars of that gunshot night with a coat of new beginnings. I'll wake at dawn, breathe in the scent of honeysuckle, and thank the world for another chance at kindness, another chance at mercy. No more bourbon bottles emptied in silence on the side table, no more prayers uttered through clenched teeth. I'll volunteer at the meal service again, shake hands with folks who need a friendly face, tell them my name and nothing more. I'll teach Sunday school stories of redemption, not as a hypocrite, but as a man who's lived in both shadow and grace. Pause. I won't run from the law I once took into my own hands. I'll submit myself to its wisdom if the time ever comes. But for now, I reclaim the role of a simple neighbor, a grandfather who bakes cornbread for porch guests and listens with the patience of someone who knows what silence can conceal. I walk inside to my study, feeling lighter than I have in 40 years, and I write a letter to Sarah, if she ever returns, apologizing for the pain I caused and thanking her for the laughter she gave me once. I tuck it in an envelope left unsealed, a symbol that my heart, too, has opened. As I blow out the oil lamp and head to bed, I feel the ache in my chest ease like a tide pulling back from the shore. I know the coming days won't be flawless, old memories will still surface like driftwood on the river, but I've chosen to build a bridge over that water, not a barrier, and I'll cross it one steady foot at a time. Tonight, I lay my head down without fear that the watch will tick one more secret into eternity. Tonight, I allow myself to live again, simply, honestly, and without regret. And tomorrow, by the light of morning, I'll greet the world with a willingness to be defined not by my past deeds, but by the compassion I offer from this day forward. I've lived long enough now to see how the tides of life reshape a man's heart, and when I look back to the nights I spent pacing this very porch, haunted by shadows, I realize the deepest truth I've learned isn't found in any courtroom or sermon, but in the quiet spaces where regret meets hope. I understand now that we all carry burdens, choices made in the name of justice were love that can't be unwound. But those burdens don't have to break us. They can teach us how to bend without shattering. I believed for years that protecting the weak meant taking power into my own hands. But I've come to see that true strength lies in surrendering that power to compassion and community. I once thought time was a judge meting out punishment, but now I know it's more like a teacher, offering lessons in every tick of the clock, the same clock I cast into the river long ago. And every lesson it taught me pointed back to one idea: that mercy is not weakness, but the bravest choice a man can make. When I compare the boy who chased fireflies with simple faith to the man who reached for his pistol in the hush of night, I see how desperation can masquerade as righteousness and how easily good intentions can give way to ruin. Today, I understand that forgiveness, both giving it and accepting it, is the bridge between who we were and who we can be. It's the only true path from the darkest version of ourselves back into the light. I've learned that secrets will always claw at your conscience until you set them free. That's speaking truth, even when your voice trembles, loosens the chains we carry in silence. And perhaps most of all, I've discovered that redemption isn't a destination reached in a single moment of contrition, but a journey of small decisions made each day, choosing kindness over anger, choosing presence over regret, choosing to share your stories so others know they're not alone. Maybe, if you find your heart heavy with choices you can't take back, it's time to stop waiting for absolution from others and offer it to yourself first. Perhaps it's time to lay down your own weapon, be it guilt, shame, or pride, and pick up the simple actions that rebuild trust: a helping hand, a listening ear, a heartfelt apology. My story might be steeped in darkness, but its true purpose was to guide me to this, a place where I no longer fear the weight of my past because I've made room in my life for purpose and connection. If there's one thing I hope you carry away, it's this: that every man and woman, no matter how deep their mistakes, still holds the power to choose mercy for themselves, to reach across the river of regret, and to step into a new sunrise of possibilities. So don't wait for time to heal. Start healing today by living in a way that honors both the lessons of your past and the promise of your tomorrow. Because the truth is, it's never too late to be the person you wish you'd been from the start. And now, dear friend, as the cicadas hum their familiar song and the river glistens under the fading light, I turn to you, not as a distant storyteller, but as a fellow traveler on the winding road of life. You've walked with me through nights haunted by my own hands, felt the ache of regret in each sorrowful confession, and glimpsed the fragile ember of hope that flickered to life in my heart. Today, this tale is more than a dusty memory of days long past. It's alive in every choice I make as the sun rises over these Georgia pines, and every kind word I offer to a neighbor or a stranger in need. When I think of Sarah's laughter drifting like a hymn across the county fairgrounds, I'm reminded that true love, like the river's current, has a way of returning to the places it once touched, carrying with it both the sweetness of shared moments and the weight of unspoken goodbyes. And so I ask you, sitting there beyond this screen, do you believe that true love should return? Is it in the nature of the heart to come back, even after time and trials have tried to bury its memory beneath regret? I've spent my days rebuilding trust brick by brick, mending fences both literal and invisible, and each day, I feel her presence in the gentle breeze that rustles the magnolia leaves on my porch. Sometimes I swear I hear her soft steps among the shadows, or see her silhouette in the lantern's glow, a reminder that the people we cherish never truly leave us. This story isn't just about a man who lost his way in the dark. It's about the gift of a second chance and the courage to believe that, just as the river refuses to stand still, our hearts can find their way back to what once set them free. It's about realizing that our past may shape us, but it doesn't have to define our tomorrow. And now, as the porch light flickers on and the night birds begin their song, I leave you with that open question: if the pulse of love can echo across decades, if forgiveness can bridge the chasm between who we were and who we wish to be, then what might you dare to hope will return to you? Sometimes, when the moon's silver path dances on the water, I find myself whispering into the hush, maybe she's still out there, remembering the boy I once was and the man I chose to become. And in that lingering thought, I feel the warmth of a connection that binds us all, across time and tide, reminding me, and perhaps you, that the truest stories are those that live both in our yesterdays and in the promise of each new dawn.